Hello again, fellow modelers. We're going to be learning about some AK weathering techniques with their pencils, some splatter techniques with some oils, and making some Tamiya backpacks and satchels. Now these turned out really good, so get excited for this build. This is the ME262 with the Kettenkraftrad new kit from 2023 from Tamiya, and it's just an awesome little kit, so I really wanted to kick off the new year with a new kit that just came out last year. So first on with the tracks, I did have to sand these down. So I used 350 grit sandpaper, and then I used 1020 grit sandpaper to get these nice and smooth. Once they were smooth, I could go ahead and assemble the full track. On all my builds, I build as much as possible and then paint afterwards. It tends to be easier this way, but with this kit, I had to keep things pretty separate as there was a lot of brush painting to do. So pretty much the whole thing was sub-assembled. The parts all fit well, so it wasn't a big deal to do this. And this is what you see as a viewer on pretty much 90% of all my things. But this is the reality for all of us modelers here. This is just these things were a pain in the butt to get in. Not only did I hold it the wrong way with the tweezers, which was my fault, but I used the extra thin, quick setting cement from Tamiya, and I just haven't locked in how to use that crap yet, to be honest. Yeah, and 1 hour later, I finally got this stupid mud flap on. And once I had it on, I realized I really didn't like them. I should have sanded them or warped them or something to make them move a little bit more than they did. But anyways, I used this little clamp thing, and then we can get to spraying all these little parts. So the wheel assembly, I chose to assemble it first before putting on the wheel. You're gonna have to bend those out to put the wheel on, but you could probably do it. It just was easier to paint the wheel separately than painting the top part. Next, I painted the whole model with this dark auburn color from Vallejo, as German tanks and stuff had a red primer on them, I guess. I'm not a tank guy. This is the first time I've ever done anything besides an airplane or an X-Wing. So I might be wrong here, but it seemed to me that there was like a red underlining to this tan color, so I wanted to portray that in the model. I went ahead and covered most of that red liner up, just because if I was wrong, I didn't want it to be too prominent, and it honestly just gives a better depth of color to that tan. So I went ahead with it and left a little bit red there, as I did see underneath the wheel wells and track wells, or whatever they're called, there was a little bit of a red like fade line, so I kind of tried to make that happen with this kit very, very subtly. Next, I used some brown color to accent the panel lines and other areas that would first get dirty if this tank were to be in the field. Whenever I'm airbrushing with Vallejo paints, I make sure to thin it as much as possible. So here I have it thinned out to 70-30 about paint to mixer ratio, and that works pretty well. This is a Tamiya set of military miniature series. It has a whole bunch of goodies in here, and since I'm doing a diorama, I figured I could use it. It comes with 2 sprues, and one of the sprues is German and the other sprue is American, so it actually comes with a lot of parts. Since it's going to be a German diorama, I went with the German stuff. So I picked the backpack and the satchel to best fit the model. I just wanted a couple things in here that were different from the kit that kind of gave it to life, like some dude forgot his backpack or sent his backpack home with the guys after, I don't know, fixing his airplane or something. Next, I make my own wet palette with some wax paper and some paper towel. And this is just a temporary one, so it doesn't need to be perfect. It's just gonna keep those colors wet for now. I added some dark green to this tan to give it a little bit of a green tint, as that's what I had seen with my eye in reference photos. Now, if that's incorrect, it possibly could be. This is my first attempt at doing anything other than an aircraft again. So I use a little heater to speed up the process, and you can get one of these online from Amazon. It's a legit thing, probably the best tool on my workbench. I got this one for Christmas, actually. I had a heat gun, but it just melted too much stuff, so this little mini one does a really good job. I use some highlighting effects with some dark green just to bring out that green tint behind the tan color. It tends to work pretty well. And then I use some water to dull it down and blend it in a little bit more. Next, I use a dark wash to complete the tan color so far. Now I use a lighter tan color. I mixed in the white with that pre-greened mix, and I really wanted a high contrast. So it really stood out that light was hitting this area. So I put it on the upper surfaces and the things that would be seen by the light. And the idea that I have for this actual particular placement of the backpack, the light will be hitting the backpack directly. So I wanted to make sure that there was enough accents on it. After every single time I painted an object, I would actually wet a cotton swab and rub it over the surface, as it does dull the paint down just a little bit so that the contrast is left, but it's not left too much. Next, I mixed these two colors together to get a nice brown leather strap. As in reference photos, I also saw it had a reddish brown strap on the actual backpack itself. So I just wanted to mimic that. If you're not very good at painting and you get too much on a certain place, a dark wash will actually help the effect. So you just put a dark wash on afterwards and it straightens up the line just right. Next, I'm using some gold to actually make the buckles for this backpack. I thought it'd be a nice little touch to add some gold buckles. I don't know if I saw it in reference, but whatever. This is a actually pure white color. I'm just using that Vallejo primer white, and I'm just touching up little tiny areas, corners, raised surfaces, whatever I can, just a tiny touch of white just to give it a little bit of that more pop. After popping the color so much, I opted to actually wash this with a tan color, as it was kind of a little bit too dark, what I was thinking in my mind. So I put a little bit of this wash on it and it blended everything in pretty well actually. When it's all said and done, I think for my first backpack, it actually turned out pretty good. Next, I'm painting this little satchel green. I don't know if they were actually green in the military, but I really needed some contrast on that bike. So since the Kettenkraftrad was tan and the backpack was tan, I opted to just make this satchel green and go with it. Maybe you tank guys out there might better inform me of what was actually in the wartime, but let's face it, not everything on this bike could be tan. There is probably a green satchel out there somewhere, but I highlighted it with lime green and made sure to really contrast the finish as much as possible. Now I used like 3 different colors of green. I just kept adding white to the light green as to bring out more shades of lightness as I went up the model to actually show that the model was receiving light. Next, I went ahead and dulled that contrast down, which I don't know if this is the right way to do this. It's just the way I did it. And then I used some dark brown wash, and then I redid a tan color on the raised areas to make it really pop. So it almost had like 4 or 5 different colors here of contrasting things in different ways. So I contrasted it 3 times up to the brighter colors, and then dulled it down with a darker color, and then brightened it back up with a couple colored pencils, and then dulled it back down with a darker wash. And then I painted this little strap brown, and that seemed to work pretty good for this little satchel that I really didn't have high hopes for that I could really do that well, but it turned out better than the backpack, I think. This is the little piece that goes on top of the model, and in reference photos, it had a kind of brownish, greenish, tannish type of cloth. Honestly, I found a couple different reference pictures of different types of cloths that were on these things. So I just opted to go with a base color that I already had, kind of paint it tannish green, and try my best to make this thing look like it was a real cloth wrapped with belt buckles. So we'll just see what happens. It turned out pretty good for my liking, but honestly, I had no preparation for it. I just threw some colors on it and see where it went, and I threw a wash on it too, and then the wash was too dark, so then I threw a lighter wash on it, and that seemed to be the final touch. After doing so much to different areas, I really think I pulled this little cloth off, but who knows. I painted the belt buckles a yellow color as to add to more contrast, as in the reference photos it was a lighter color of tan. It just wasn't enough contrast for me, so I opted to do the yellow color, and that turned out pretty well. Next, I did a steel color on the buckles, as that's what I saw in some reference photos, and I think it's pretty darn accurate. I really enjoyed just throwing some colors on it and seeing where it went. It came out pretty good for my liking. This is the AK Weather pencil. You dip it in some water and then you just go to town. You can make this thing look super dirty with a little bit of water, and it's super nice. So easy to use and so easy to wash off. This is now that I figured out how to use these pencils, It's my go-to thing for weathering, especially dirty vehicles that are on the ground all the time. It's kind of hard to get a vehicle really dirty or flat surfaces really dirty with oils because they wash off so easily. But with this AK pencil stuff, it sticks on there so good, and it also clumps up too, so it's really easy to make dirt. Once you have this stuff written on with a wet pencil where you want it, you take a wet brush and you just spread it out just a little bit, going from place to place with a little tiny brush. That seems to make a really good pattern. And then I went back with a cotton swab and just gave it a little bit of texture. It seemed to work really well, and I just used 3 different colors of these AK pencils of dirt colors, and it gave it a lot of life. It gave it a lot of almost rust effects, but not. And I was going for dirt effects, but I think the colors came out pretty good, and I really like the streaking effects that it came down to it too. It also doesn't even have a real sheen or shine to these AK weathering stuff, so that's another plus with these things, as some oils really have a glossy finish, and that can ruin a model if you think about it. So next I painted the seat a light tan color, as these were either black or red brown or this tan color, so I just kind of went for it. I also gave it a little bit of texture while the paint was wet so that it had like a leather seat, so I wanted to make it seem like that the seat had some texture to it, so I used a sponge to do that. Next, I could paint all these black parts with some black paint. It was super hard painting these tracks with all this black, but it was worth it in the end. I had black Vallejo paint and just wicks into those seams. If you get a little bit off, you can wipe it off with a cotton swab. No big deal. Next, I just weathered the wheels just as I weathered the backside of the wheels, just with that AK weathering pencil and a couple other oils as well, as the oils will wick in just a little bit better than the weathering pencils. So I wanted to use a darker oil on the outside to replicate some dirt and oil as well. And then I just wiped the excess off with a cotton swab, just like normal. That seemed to make a really good fine effect. I did the same thing on the front wheel as well, and it really did come out good, as all the Tamiya decals and details are super nice, and the paint flows into them super well. For the front, I'm doing some rust effects, as I did see in some reference photos that the front rusted out before the rest, so I opted to do that. So I put some dirt on the wheels and got to some weathering effects later. With these powdered dirt effects, it just makes it so easy. Life is super easy with powdered dirt effects for wheels. You just rub it in with your fingers, and if you want it off, you just rub it more with your fingers. It's super easy and super convenient. It doesn't ruin the model ever because you can take it off with straight water. And I just used 2 different colors here. I used the light tan and the dark brown, and that gave it a lively look, as I don't think these things were marching around in sand. I think they were more in dirt and stuff, so I opted to use more of the brown powder to cover these tracks as well as the tire. This stuff chunks up as well. It almost builds up the more you put on it. So I opted to do that on the top of the wheels just for a lively effect, like this thing was trenching through some dirt recently. Now that I have all the parts painted and weathered, I can assemble the whole thing and just do the final touches on the last part. So here I'm using some oil paints and just spraying it onto the model as see fit. I dip it in some oil paints and just flick a dry brush onto the model. Test this on a piece of paper before putting it on your model, as you want to see the effect first, so that you're making sure that you're not putting too much on. I use a cotton swab to wipe it off any area that it got on before. Now I'm assembling the tire. As you can see, you can put the tire on last. You don't have to assemble it on and make your life super difficult, so you can put it on last. Next, I give this thing a look over and see what needs to be done. I can see some parts are just a little bit too dirty for my liking, so I went ahead and off screen touched everything up that I saw fit. Next, I assembled the whole model together. And it looks pretty good, but I think there's still a little bit of life I can put into this thing. Next, I used some super glue to attach these 2 parts to the model. And lo and behold, somehow, the super glue got attached to my finger. Now, let me know if this happens to you every single time you use super glue, because it does to me. But lo and behold, it came on and didn't have any problems. Luckily. Most of the time, I don't, but sometimes there's that one problem that you run into. Anyways, next I move on to some rusting effects on the front end here. And I wanted to make these very subtle and blend in very well, as these things probably wouldn't have seen too much rust in the field. So I wanted to be subtle about it. One of the reference photos that I did get was a modern restored one, and it did have the nose of this thing rusted completely out, which I wanted to mimic the start of that. So I just used 3 different rust colors and used a sponge to kind of blotch them on. Next, I can wash the rest of the model, and this is pretty much the final step. I'm using the Africa Corpse MIG wash, and this seems to do really well, and it wipes off super easy. So I just, as soon as I put it on, I wiped it off. And any splotches or things like that, I just wiped off with a Q-tip. All right, that's it.